There is one Family Guy episode that Fox, the network that has aired this show for over 2 decades, has never once let onto American television. Not banned by mistake, not quietly buried, flat out refused. In a show full of jokes about dead children, terrorist attacks, and every taboo you can name, one episode crossed a line the network would not cross back across. And the reason it was banned is not what you would guess. This video is not about the banned episode. This video is about 10 of them. 10 moments across 20 plus seasons where Family Guy dropped the cutaways, dropped the jokes, and turned the lights down. A dog admitting he wanted to die. A teenage girl saying out loud that her family abuses her. A Christmas special about a dying Santa. A 2-minute speech that ruined a main character forever. Welcome back to Red Umbrella. Let's begin. The only episode they would never let air. Partial terms of endearment. There is a Family Guy episode you have probably never seen on TV. Not because you missed it, not because it was on late at night, but because Fox, the network that has aired Family Guy for over 2 decades, looked at this episode, thought about it, and then refused to put it on the air. Not once, not ever. In the entire run of the show, across hundreds of episodes full of jokes about murder, cannibalism, teen pregnancy, 9/11, the Holocaust, the disabled, the dead, the dying, and everyone in between, this is the only episode that Fox flat out decided was not worth the risk. And the weirdest part of that story is that when you actually watch the episode, it is not even the meanest thing the show has ever made. It might not even crack the top 20. What it is instead is the thing Family Guy was never really supposed to do. It picks a side. The episode is called Partial Terms of Endearment. It was made for season 8. It was written with real care. Seth MacFarlane specifically asked one of his writers, Danny Smith, to read a long essay by the scientist Carl Sagan called Abortion. Is it possible to be both pro-life and pro-choice? Before he even started working on the script. That is not the normal Family Guy writing process. The normal Family Guy writing process is a room full of comedy writers tossing out cutaway ideas about Kool-Aid Man or the time Peter fought a giant chicken. This one was different from the start. MacFarlane wanted it to be a real attempt at handling the topic of abortion. He wanted the episode to actually think about it. The setup is simple enough that you could describe it in one breath. Lois runs into an old friend from college named Naomi at a reunion. Naomi and her husband Dale cannot have a baby. They ask Lois if she would be willing to carry one for them. After some pushback from Peter, Lois says yes. Then, before the baby is born, Naomi and Dale are killed in a car crash. Lois is left holding a pregnancy she did not plan for a family that no longer exists. She has to decide what to do. That is the whole engine of the episode. It is not really a cutaway gag factory. It is a story about a woman deciding whether she wants to carry a baby to term. The show walks her through both sides of the decision. Peter flips back and forth depending on whoever talked to him last. When he sees an anti-abortion protester and watches a scare video, he shows up at the house yelling about the rights of the unborn. When Brian pushes back and asks him what should happen if a woman is raped, Peter fires back with a punchline so cold it actually tells you exactly what the show thinks about that kind of argument. The line is that the woman should have thought of that before asking Peter for directions. It is a joke, but the joke is on Peter. The show is making him the idiot of that exchange. It is telling you that the kind of person who shouts about rights of the unborn without thinking for 2 seconds about the actual humans involved is not someone you are supposed to agree with. And then, at the end of the episode, Lois goes through with the abortion. That is the ending. Peter turns to the camera and says flat out that they had the abortion. No cutaway, no softening, no dream sequence trick where it turns out none of it really happened. The episode picks a side, commits to it, and ends. That is what scared the network. Not the jokes, not the Looney Tunes spoof where Peter tries to trick Lois off a cliff so she will miscarry, not even the scene where Peter draws what he thinks a vagina looks like and it ends up looking like a cartoon monkey logo. The network could live with all of that. The network has been living with stuff like that since 1999. What the network could not live with was an episode of a cartoon family sitcom made by the same people who made Peter fight a giant chicken, looking at the single most heated topic in American politics and saying out loud which answer it preferred. Fox refused to air it. This was in 2010. The president of Fox at the time, a man named Kevin Riley, later explained the choice. He said the economy was struggling, the advertisers were nervous, and abortion was the one issue that was the biggest hot button of all. He even admitted, in his own words, that the episode handled the subject fine. He was not saying the episode was bad. He was saying it was trouble. He said it just was not worth it. The first time Family Guy had been told no by Fox, it was a season 3 episode called When You Wish Upon a Weinstein, where Peter tries to find a Jewish accountant because he believes it will magically fix his money problems. Fox held that one back too, and it eventually aired 3 years later on Adult Swim and then on Fox. So when MacFarlane got the news about partial terms of endearment, he assumed the same thing would happen. A few years would pass, the nervous feelings would cool down, the episode would find a home. But that is not what happened. Adult Swim, which had been willing to save the last one, turned this one down. The episode did not sneak out on late-night cable. It did not quietly appear on a streaming service years later. It just sat there, done, finished, fully animated, and unaired. It did eventually air, but not in the United States. On June 20th, 2010, the episode was broadcast on a British channel called BBC 3. The UK saw it, Australia saw it in a slightly edited version. The United States, the country the show was made in, did not. The only way an American could legally watch the episode was to go buy the DVD that Fox released in September of that same year. That was the deal. You wanted to see it, you had to pay for it and bring it home yourself. It would not come to you over the air for free, the way every other Family Guy episode did. For a while, there was a small clip of the episode that slipped through. In 2012, Family Guy made a big special called 200 Episodes Later, a kind of clip show celebrating how many episodes the show had made. A few seconds of partial terms of endearment got used in that special, which technically meant a piece of it had touched broadcast television. But the full episode, start to finish, has never aired on Fox. It has never aired on any American cable channel. Years later, when Disney bought the rights and started putting Family Guy on Disney Plus in other parts of the world, the company quietly left this one episode off. In 2021, Disney made sure partial terms of endearment was not streaming even in the countries where the rest of the show was. The ban followed the episode across platforms, across years, across the change of the company that owned it. More than 15 years after it was finished, it is still the one Family Guy episode that most of the people who love the show have never seen, even if they think they have seen everything. The strange thing is how many people who did see it came back saying it was actually good. IGN gave the DVD release a fair review and praised the writers for not chickening out at the end. The critic there said the real surprise was that Family Guy, a show often written off as shallow, was one of the only shows on television at the time willing to directly address a topic that most shows would not go near. There were reviewers who found the episode too crude, too mean, or just not funny enough. But even the ones who disliked it tended to admit that the writers had at least tried. They had made a real attempt. That is not something you can say about every Family Guy episode. So the question becomes, why? Why this episode out of all of them? Family Guy has made cutaway jokes about the death of real public figures. It has made jokes about September 11th within days of the anniversary. It has made jokes for decades at the expense of the disabled, the mentally ill, the elderly, entire religions, entire countries. It has had Peter beat up a woman in a sequence that the writers themselves admit was meant to make you uncomfortable. It has had a character sing a cheerful song to another character about giving him AIDS. None of those got banned. All of them aired. Most of them still air today in reruns, on streaming, on cable, in syndication, all over the world. The line the network drew was not at cruelty. It was not at shock. It was not at taste. The line was at a political stand. That is the quiet lesson of partial terms of endearment. You can be as mean as you want. You can go as low as you want. You can aim as wide as you want. What you cannot do, at least not on Fox in 2010, is stop hiding behind the jokes long enough to actually mean something. The second you stop being an equal opportunity offender and start being a person with a point, the people paying for the advertising get nervous. The people paying for the advertising getting nervous is the real editor of American network television. The writers do not make the final call. The standards board does not make the final call. The money does. And the money decided that Lois having an abortion in a cartoon in 2010 was more dangerous than every joke about dead children the show had ever made put together. You can feel MacFarlane's frustration about this in the interviews he gave around the time. He pointed out, correctly, that the whole point of Family Guy had always been that nothing was off the table. That was the promise of the show. That was the sales pitch. You tune in and anything can happen. Any joke can get made. Any topic can get hit. And for the first time, the network had looked at one of his scripts and said, no, not this one. Not even for us. After years of being called an equal opportunity offender, MacFarlane McFarlane had finally made something his own bosses would not run. He thought they would eventually cave. They did not. What makes the band matter, more than a decade later, is what it says about the show's whole personality. Family Guy spent 2 full decades building a reputation as the show that would do anything. You heard it from fans, you heard it from critics, you heard it from McFarlane himself. Nothing is too far, nothing is sacred, nothing is safe. But partial terms of endearment proves that the boast was never quite true. There was a place the show would not be allowed to go, and it turned out not to be the place you would have guessed. It was not the bloodiest place. It was not the grossest place. It was not the most mean-spirited place. It was the place where the writers stopped playing and actually said what they believed. The second they did that, the doors shut. The machine that could handle a cartoon dog getting run over by a drunk driver could not handle a pregnant woman making a choice on screen. The episode still sits there, on DVDs growing older in basements and shelves, on the hard drives of fans who tracked it down years ago, on a few streaming platforms in countries where the rules are different. It is, in its own quiet way, the darkest thing Family Guy has ever done. Not because of what is in it, because of what happened to it. Because it is the only proof that even a show that built its brand on having no rules actually had one rule all along. The rule was that you can be as mean as you like, as long as you do not mean it. __quote _0 ___. But if partial terms of endearment is the darkest episode the show was never allowed to air, there is another one, 3 years later, that every single fan did see. This one ran on Fox, in prime time, on a Sunday night in November, with no warning and no escape hatch. And when the credits rolled, one of the most beloved characters in the show's history was lying dead on a table while his family cried around him. And for a few very strange weeks, nobody, not even the people who made the show, seemed sure whether he was ever coming back. Section 2. The Night Brian Died. Life of Brian. On the night of November 24th, 2013, Family Guy killed one of its main characters, on purpose, in front of a live audience of almost 5 million people, and did it in the single most ordinary way a character can die. No time machine fight, no alien attack, no huge explosion. Just a dog, a hockey net, a street, and a car coming around the corner too fast. The episode is called Life of Brian. It is the 6th episode of season 12, and for about 2 weeks, the people who ran Family Guy acted as if they really meant it. That is what makes The Night Brian Died strange. You can argue about whether the episode was any good. You can argue about whether the writers were being brave or just pulling a stunt. What you cannot argue about is the shock of it. Brian was not a side character. Brian was one of the most used, most loved, most essential pieces of the whole show. He was in the first episode in 1999. He was in nearly every episode after that. Along with Stewie, he was one of only 2 characters who had never missed a week, give or take a few exceptions over the years. When you think of Family Guy, you think of Peter and Brian at the Drunken Clam. You think of Brian and Stewie in the back of a car on a road trip. You think of Brian sitting at the dinner table, taking a drink, and being the only one in the room with something close to a brain. Take him out of the show, and the show stops looking like itself, which is exactly what the writers wanted to see. The episode opens in a way that hides its real intentions. Brian and Stewie are on one of their time travel adventures, running from angry Native Americans they accidentally gave guns to in a trip to Jamestown. They fix the mistake, come back to the present day, and decide, finally, that enough is enough. Time travel has almost killed them too many times. Stewie takes the time machine to the junkyard and destroys it for good. On the way home from the junkyard, they find a street hockey net at the curb, grab it, and take it back to the house. They set it up in the middle of the road. Stewie goes inside for just a second to grab his knee pads. While Stewie is inside, a car comes barreling down the street and hits Brian head on. The impact is violent. Brian goes flying. The car does not stop. There is no explanation for who was driving. There is no follow-up arc about the driver. The show never tells you who killed him. It just happens. The family rushes Brian to the vet. He is badly hurt. The doctor tells them there is nothing that can be done. Brian, lying on the table, with his eyes half closed, looks around at the Griffins gathered there crying. Peter is crying. Lois is crying. Chris is crying. Meg is crying. Stewie, who has just destroyed the only thing that could have saved his best friend, is the most broken of them all. Brian uses the last of his strength to speak. His final line is, "I love you all." That is it. That is the exit of a 14-year-old character. A sentence that short, spoken to people who cannot stop crying, in a cartoon that you grew up thinking of as a joke machine. The show does not rush past it either. They hold the funeral. A huge group of characters show up, stretching back across years of the show, including Cleveland coming in from his spin-off to say goodbye. For the rest of the episode, the family is a wreck. Stewie, in particular, cannot stop blaming himself, because he knows that if he had not destroyed the time machine, he could have gone back and stopped it. He tries to rebuild it. He finds out he cannot because one of the men who sold him parts has been killed in some strange off-screen accident. There is no way back. Brian is gone. And then the show introduces the new dog. About a month passes inside the story. Lois decides the family needs to move on, and the Griffins go to a pet store. Peter picks a talking Italian-American dog named Vinny, who is voiced by a real actor. That actor is Tony Sirico. If that name does not mean anything to you, think of him as Paulie Walnuts. He is the guy from The Sopranos, one of the most famous shows on television, playing a mobster character. Sirico steps in to voice Vinny, and Vinny becomes the new family dog. That is the whole setup. Brian is dead, Vinny is the replacement. The show is going to keep going with a brand new character in the slot that Brian used to fill. Now, if you are sitting at home in November 2013, watching this for the first time, you have every reason to believe this is real. Seth MacFarlane, who made the show and who voices Brian, is the one telling you this is real. The writers are telling you this is real. The producers are telling you this is real. Before the episode even aired, one of the top people on the show, a writer named Steve Callahan, gave an interview where he flat out admitted it. He said the idea came up in the writer's room, it caught fire, and they got excited about how the change would affect the family. He said it seemed more realistic for a dog to die, because dogs do not live as long as humans. He talked about the next few episodes as if there was a whole new plan in motion. Vinny was going to be around. Vinny was the new direction. They even named him, cast him, gave him his own personality, had him bond with Stewie, and wrote him into The Drunken Clam with Peter, Joe, and Quagmire as a new drinking buddy, and the audience believed it. That belief turned into something nobody at the show had expected. Within hours of the episode airing, a fan made an online petition asking Fox and Seth MacFarlane to bring Brian back. The petition grew faster than almost any other entertainment-related petition that had ever been made on that kind of website. Thousands of signatures piled up overnight. More kept coming. People wrote tributes. People got tattoos of Brian. People got tattoos that actually said the letters R.I.P. next to a cartoon picture of Brian. Grown adults, openly and publicly, were in mourning for a talking dog that they all knew was not real. News outlets picked it up. The Guardian wrote about it. Entertainment Weekly wrote about it. Rolling Stone wrote about it. A random Sunday night cartoon death had become actual news. MacFarlane himself later admitted he had not seen the response coming. He said, in his own words, that the team was surprised in a good way that people still cared enough about that character to be that angry. He had assumed a small stir. He had not planned for rage. The difference between the stir they wanted and the rage they got is the whole point of the life of Brian's story. The writers thought they were running a small experiment. The fans heard the experiment as a betrayal. And so, 2 weeks after Brian died, Brian came back. The follow-up happened in a Christmas episode in season 12 called Christmas Guy. It aired on December 15th, 2013. Stewie, still broken over Brian's death, is out doing Christmas errands when he happens to see a version of himself from the past, the one who had traveled forward in time earlier that same season to beat the rush for Christmas toys. Past Stewie still has a working time machine. Present Stewie, with everything he has, realizes this is his one shot. He sneaks over to the past version of himself, steals the time machine pad, and goes back to the moment of the accident. He arrives in time, grabs Brian, and pulls him out of the road before the car comes around the corner. Brian lives. The timeline resets. Vinny, who has spent 2 episodes bonding with the family, vanishes, along with the accident. He is not dead. He simply never moved in, because the original reason for him was erased. The whole thing was over in 3 episodes. Brian was dead for about 2.5 weeks of real-world time. When the credits rolled on Christmas Guy, the status quo of Family Guy was exactly where it had been before Life of Brian. So what was the point? That is the question fans have been asking ever since. The most generous answer is the one MacFarlane gave himself. The writers wanted to see if the audience still cared. They wanted to test the bond between viewers and characters. They wanted to prove that people could still be moved by a cartoon, even after 20-plus seasons of cutaway gags and pop culture references. By that measure, the experiment worked. People cared. They cared very loudly. The less generous answer is that it was a publicity stunt. Family Guy was getting older. Ratings had been slipping. A network show in its 12th year does not make the front page of the entertainment section on a normal Monday. Brian dying did. Fans signing petitions did. Tattoos did. For about a month, Family Guy was the most talked about cartoon in America. And then, conveniently, the writers got to save their fan favorite character, look like heroes for listening to the audience and go right back to making normal episodes. The truth is probably somewhere in between. The writers took a risk that was bigger than they realized. The audience reacted harder than anyone predicted. The show course-corrected as fast as it could and used the Christmas episode to give everyone a happy ending. That is how Family Guy, a show that built its whole personality on being mean and ready to joke about anything, ended up running the single most unexpectedly emotional 3-episode arc in its history. But here is the part that sticks. For the few weeks Brian was gone, the show was actually willing to be sad. Life of Brian does not crack a lot of jokes at the vet. The funeral scene is played almost straight. Stewie's grief is played completely straight. The family arguments that follow are less about punchlines and more about people who do not know what to do with their pain. Even the AV Club, which has never been kind to late-era Family Guy, admitted that Brian's death scene was as close to genuinely moving as the show could get. The writer of that review used the word poignant. Poignant is not a word that normally shows up next to Family Guy. It showed up that week because for 22 minutes, the show stopped pretending that nothing mattered. The flip side is also true. Because the writers brought Brian back so quickly, the whole arc now reads as a kind of bluff. You cannot kill a character, make the audience weep, and then undo it 2 weeks later without teaching the audience that you will never really mean it. After Christmas Guy aired, a lot of fans never again took a Family Guy death seriously. Why would they? They had watched the show pull the trigger on one of its own and then catch the bullet mid-air before any real damage happened. The next time a Griffin got hurt, nobody wept. Everyone just waited for the reset. That may be the real cost of Life of Brian. Not that it was too dark, not that it was too sad, but that it proved the dark stuff on Family Guy is always temporary. The show can go to any emotional place it wants, as long as it comes back before the audience quits on it. It is allowed to break your heart as long as it promises, always, to tape it back together before next month's episode. That is a different deal than the one most grown-up dramas make with their viewers. It is closer to the deal a child's show makes. Nobody really dies. Nobody really gets hurt. Everyone you love comes home before the credits. Still, for those 2 weeks, the fans were real. The petition was real. The grief was real. The tattoos on people's arms are still there today, long after Brian himself stopped being dead. Somewhere in the world, there are probably dozens of people walking around right now with R.I.P. Brian ink on their skin. Ink they got during those 14 days when a cartoon funeral hit them harder than most things that week. That is not a small thing. That is a show that had earned, without anybody fully realizing it, the kind of emotional weight its jokes were always trying to pretend it did not have. Life of Brian is the episode where Family Guy showed its real hand. When it tried to be sad, people actually got sad. When it tried to say goodbye, people actually said goodbye. And when it took the goodbye back, it gave away the one rule it had been living by for a decade. The rule was simple, and in hindsight, a little sad itself. This show, no matter how loud it gets, no matter how mean it gets, is not actually willing to lose anything it loves. Quote, _1__. But if Brian's death was the episode where the show broke your heart on purpose and then made up for it 2 weeks later, there is another episode from around the same period where the show tried something even riskier. There was no spaceship, there was no time machine, there was no way for anybody to get saved at the last second. The writers took the 2 most popular characters in the entire show, locked them in a room together, and did something Family Guy had never done before or since. For the next 22 minutes, they did not tell a single joke. Section 3. Screams of Silence. The story of Brenda Q and the domestic violence episode nobody knew how to review. There is a specific kind of Family Guy episode that fans talk about in hushed voices. Not the banned one, not the shocking one, the uncomfortable one. The one that comes on during a rerun marathon and suddenly makes you reach for the remote, not to laugh, but to check that you are really watching the same show. Season 10, Episode 3, aired on Halloween night, October 30th, 2011. It is called Screams of Silence, the story of Brenda Q. And to this day, 15 years later, nobody can agree on whether it should exist. This was not the show accidentally going too far. The writers knew what they were doing. The episode was written by Alex Sulkin, one of the top writers on Family Guy, a man who had already written some of the show's best-known work. It was directed by Dominic Bianchi, who had just directed the landmark 150th episode the year before. The main guest star was Caitlin Olsen, the actress from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, brought in to play Quagmire's younger sister, Brenda. The abusive boyfriend, Jeff, was voiced by a longtime voice actor named Ralph Garman. The people working on this episode were not interns. They were the main crew, top to bottom. This was a planned thing. The opening itself is already dark in a way that only Family Guy could pull off. Peter and Joe show up to go fishing with Quagmire. Quagmire does not come out. They go into his house to check on him. They find him hanging by the neck in his closet, not because he has tried to end his life, but because he has been doing something private that went wrong. The show has a word for it, which I will not use. But the short version is that Quagmire almost killed himself by accident while doing something sexual, alone, in his closet. Peter and Joe cut him down and rush him to the hospital. Quagmire is in a coma. That is just the setup. The real story has not started yet. While Quagmire is unconscious, his younger sister Brenda arrives at the hospital to see him. She is not alone. She brings her boyfriend, Jeff. Jeff is, from the first second he appears, terrifying. He is loud. He never stops talking. He insults everyone in the room. He has a short, tight haircut, a thick mustache, a scratchy voice, and the kind of explosive temper that makes everyone around him go quiet. Within minutes, it is obvious to the audience that something is wrong with how he treats Brenda. He gets in her face. He yells at her for tiny things. He talks over her. He mocks her in front of people they both just met. Quagmire wakes up from his coma, and Brenda convinces him to let her and Jeff stay at his house while he recovers. That is when the episode stops being a dark comedy and becomes something else. The first night at the house, Jeff and Brenda go upstairs. The whole neighborhood can hear Jeff screaming at her through the walls. The next day, Lois takes Brenda out to lunch to talk. Brenda is wearing sunglasses indoors. Lois asks her gently to take them off. Brenda takes them off. She has a black eye. Lois tries to talk to her about leaving Jeff. Brenda defends him. She makes excuses. She tells Lois it was her fault. Lois is stunned. This is not how Family Guy usually handles anything. Family Guy handles things with a cutaway gag. Peter will mention something serious, and then the screen will wipe to a 2-second joke about the Kool-Aid Man, and the serious thing will be forgotten. That is not what is happening here. The show is holding the camera on Brenda. The show is letting Lois be horrified. The show is not cutting away. For several minutes at a time, the episode looks less like Family Guy and more like an after-school special from the 90s about abuse, except with animated characters doing the talking. The guys plan an intervention at the Drunken Clam. It goes badly. Peter tries to turn the conversation into a joke about smoking. Chris gets distracted because Joe calls him the wrong name. Meg gives Brenda terrible advice, suggesting she try to change Jeff. The only person who actually says anything useful is Quagmire, who tells his sister plainly that this man is going to end up killing her. For a second, it looks like he has gotten through. Then Jeff himself walks in and takes over the room. Brenda announces in front of everyone that they are getting married because she is pregnant with his child. That night, back at Quagmire's house, the guys watch Jeff yell at Brenda and hit her right in front of them, inside the house, in the kitchen. Joe, the police officer, tells everyone that he cannot arrest Jeff unless Brenda files a formal complaint. In real life, in the actual state of Rhode Island, where Family Guy is set, that is not how the law actually works. The police are legally required to make an arrest in a domestic assault case if there is reason to believe one happened, whether the victim wants to press charges or not. The writers either did not know that or chose to ignore it. Either way, the Joe scene ends with all of them deciding that the law is not going to help Brenda. That is the point where the episode shifts from a dark comedy to something darker. Peter, the idiot of the show, makes a joke that he wishes they could just beat Jeff up. Quagmire, who has watched his sister being hurt for days, says quietly that he wants to kill him. They go to Quagmire's house. They invite Jeff on a midnight hunting trip. They drive him out into the woods with the plan of shooting him and burying him where nobody will ever find him. Once they are deep in the woods, Jeff goes off to use the bathroom. The three men huddle. Quagmire says he is ready to do it the moment Jeff comes back. But Jeff is smarter than they expected. He sneaks up behind them and puts his gun to the back of Quagmire's head. Joe tries to reach for his weapon. Jeff threatens to shoot Quagmire in the back of the skull if anyone moves. Joe freezes. Jeff forces the other two to agree to stop. He then knocks Peter and Joe out with the butt of his shotgun, takes Peter's car, and drives Quagmire even deeper into the woods, planning to kill him alone. What happens next is the moment the episode is remembered for. Jeff beats Quagmire almost to death. He punches him. He strangles him. Quagmire goes limp. Jeff grabs a shovel to bury the body. Out of the darkness, the car headlights turn on. Quagmire, bloodied and barely conscious, is behind the wheel. He drives the car straight into Jeff, crushing him between the front bumper and a tree. The one line the show gives him in that moment is grim and personal. emotional. He tells Jeff, as he runs him down, that he strangles himself every day and that he survives it. The next morning, the three of them go back to Quagmire's house. Brenda is sitting there, crying because Jeff has not come home. They hand her a note they have written themselves, pretending to be Jeff, saying he has decided to leave her. They do not tell her he is dead. They do not tell her that they killed him. They tell her, in a lie, that the man who terrorized her for years simply walked out. Brenda, still in love with her abuser, sits there and sobs over the note. She says the word she loves the most about him. She grieves him as if he were good. The episode ends with a dark punchline from Peter. He looks around and says he kind of wants to kill somebody else now, too. Cut to credits. That is the episode. That is the whole thing. There is no big lesson. There is no moment where Brenda realizes she is free. There is no hug. There is no speech about how abuse is wrong. There is no hotline number on the screen. Family Guy took one of the most serious topics a show can pick up, followed it almost all the way to the ground, and then landed the plane with a one-liner. The people reviewing the episode at the time could not figure out what to do with it. The critic at the AV Club, a man named Kevin McFarland, wrote that a serious episode of Family Guy cripples the show's strengths. He pointed out that there was no good way to react to what he was watching. Comedy is supposed to lighten a dark story. This episode had almost no jokes. The dark story was left alone, to sit there, heavy, for minutes at a time. He wrote that while other shows were running their silly Halloween specials that same week, Family Guy had decided to run an episode about domestic abuse that wrote off any chance that comedy could save it if things went wrong. He praised Caitlin Olsen's voice acting as Brenda. He criticized almost everything else. Fans were split down the middle. Some loved it. They thought the show was finally growing up, finally willing to tell a story that mattered. Others hated it. They felt the writers had taken a real, painful, complicated issue and handled it with the same lazy shortcuts they used for everything else. Some abuse survivors watched the episode and felt seen. Some abuse survivors watched the episode and felt used. The line kept moving based on who you asked. The biggest criticism of the episode, looking back now, is not even about the violence. It is about the ending. Brenda does not escape her situation by growing, by speaking up, by asking for help. She is saved because three of her brother's friends decide to murder her boyfriend for her. That is not a rescue that teaches anyone anything. She is still going to believe Jeff loved her. She is still going to be the woman who defended her abuser to the end. The show even hints, in small details, that the pattern will likely repeat. She is pregnant with Jeff's baby. She is still inside her own broken thinking. The only thing that has changed is that Jeff is now buried in the woods. What makes the episode even stranger is that the Family Guy writers themselves seem to realize, eventually, that something was off. Years later, the episode was quietly recut. The recut version shuffled scenes around. It softened the original reveal of Brenda's black eye, saving it for the restaurant scene instead of showing Jeff hitting her earlier in the kitchen. Joe's line about needing Brenda to file a complaint was changed so that he simply said he had not seen the abuse himself and therefore could not act. A few of the meaner moments were trimmed. It was not a full rewrite. It was an admission, without words, that the original version had problems the writers could not quite fix. 15 years later, the episode still lives in a weird place. It is too dark to be a crowd favorite. It is too well made to dismiss. It is too serious to be called a Family Guy classic, and too much of a Family Guy episode to be taken seriously as drama. It is the place where a very silly show tried, for 22 minutes, to be a very serious show, and the result was a piece of television that nobody knows quite how to file. But the reason Screams of Silence matters in the long story of Family Guy's dark turns is not the violence. It is not the abuse. It is the proof that the writers, when they wanted to, could drop the cutaway format entirely and hold a straight face through a whole episode. Most of the time, they did not want to. This time, they did. And even the critics who hated the result had to admit that the show was capable of more than they had thought. __quote _2___. That ability to drop the jokes and play it straight showed up one more time the year before in a way that was even bolder. Because there is an earlier episode, the 150th episode of the entire show, where Family Guy did not just turn serious for a few scenes. It turned serious for the entire runtime. No cutaways at all. No music, no theme song. Just two characters locked locked in one room for 22 uninterrupted minutes. And inside that room, one of them was about to admit, out loud, something the show had been quietly suggesting about him for years. Section 4. The bottle episode that admitted Brian wanted to die. Brian and Stewie. Family Guy has a signature. You know the one. A character says a line, the screen wipes away, and suddenly you are watching a 2-second joke about something completely unrelated. A cutaway to Peter fighting a chicken. A cutaway to a random celebrity doing something weird. A cutaway to a fake commercial from 1985. The cutaway is so baked into the DNA of the show that most fans cannot imagine a Family Guy episode without one. The show has been built on cutaways for over 2 decades. They are the main engine. They are the whole shape of the comedy. Now imagine an episode with none of them. No cutaway gags. Not a single one. No theme song. No opening credits with Peter and Lois at the piano. No musical numbers. No side plots. No supporting characters. No Meg. No Chris. No Peter. No Lois. Not even Herbert. Just 2 characters in one room for the full runtime of the episode talking to each other. That is what the writers of Family Guy made for their 150th episode. It is called Brian and Stewie. It aired on May 2nd, 2010, near the end of season 8. Everybody involved with the show knew how strange it was going to be. The writer was a longtime staff member named Gary Janetti. The director was Dominic Bianchi. Seth MacFarlane, who voices both characters, basically spent the whole runtime talking to himself. He is the only actor with lines in the entire episode. For 22 uninterrupted minutes, it is just 2 voices, 1 vault, and a conversation the show had been circling around for years without ever quite landing on. The setup is so simple, it almost sounds like a play. Brian goes to his local bank in Quahog to drop some money into his safe deposit box. Stewie tags along because he wants to return an expensive sweater afterward. While they are standing inside the bank vault, bickering about the sweater, the door automatically shuts at closing time and locks them in. It is a Friday. The bank will not reopen until Monday. They are stuck, alone, in a small metal room with no way out. From the first few minutes, the episode tells you it is not going to feel like a normal episode. Stewie, in his panic, soils his diaper. What follows is a string of gross-out moments that the show has never quite lived down. He bullies Brian into eating the contents of the diaper. Then, he makes him lick him clean afterward. Then, Stewie throws up watching it. And then, Brian eats the vomit, too. These scenes alone are among the grossest things Family Guy has ever shown. And the episode is not even a third of the way over. The gross parts are not the reason the episode is remembered. The gross parts are the reason the episode is hard to rewatch. They are the wrapper around the thing the writers actually wanted to say. Because of what is in the vault with them, Brian has a safe deposit box in that bank. During the early part of their argument, Stewie grabs one of the items inside it and uses it to threaten Brian. The item is a gun. Stewie is surprised. Stewie has known Brian for his whole life. He knows Brian is against guns. Brian has been openly anti-gun in dozens of past episodes. Brian cried on the couch after the news of the Columbine school shooting, something the show mentions directly. Brian is the last character anyone in the Griffin house would expect to own a firearm, let alone keep one hidden away in a locked box at a bank. Stewie cannot let it go. Hours later, after the gross stuff has passed, after they have shared a bottle of scotch that Brian also keeps in the box, after they have gotten drunk and Stewie has gotten his ear pierced for fun with a sewing pin from the sweater, the 2 of them are lying on the vault floor. Stewie is calmer. Brian is calmer. And Stewie finally asks the question out loud. He asks Brian why he has the gun. He says it makes no sense. He says Brian is a gun control supporter. He says Brian is the last person who would ever own something like this. Brian tries to brush it off. He says the gun is nothing. He says he just keeps it there. He changes the subject. Stewie will not let him. Stewie pushes. Stewie asks again. And then, quietly, Brian tells him the truth. He keeps the gun in case he ever decides to kill himself. The bottle of scotch, he tells Stewie, is so he would have a last drink before doing it. That is what the vault really holds. A weapon and a goodbye. The safety deposit box is a place where a family dog, who spends most of every episode being a sarcastic friend to a baby, has been quietly keeping the tools of his own exit, waiting for a day he might need them. Stewie's reaction is the real heart of the episode. He is shocked. His voice changes. The comedy drops completely out of the room. He tries to understand. He asks Brian why. Brian tells him he does not live with purpose. Brian says the world feels like too much. He says nothing he does matters. He says that even though he went to that bank that day for a different reason, there is something calming for him about knowing the gun is there. Something comforting about the way out being real and reachable table if he ever needed it. The show does not make a joke out of any of it. The scene is not interrupted. There is no wipe, no cutaway, no silly music, no side character bursting in to break the tension. It is just a grown man who has voted for John McCain and worries about his unread novel, talking for the first time in the show's history about wanting to end his life. And across from him is a toddler in a diaper who does not know what to say because the show has never asked him to say anything like this. Stewie tries to talk him out of it. He suggests pills. He suggests hanging. He jokes a little because he is still Stewie, but the jokes are not landing and both characters know it. Then Stewie asks him directly if suicide was the reason Brian came to the bank that day. Brian, almost with relief, tells him no. He says he came to put money into his Christmas savings. He says the gun has been sitting in that box for a long time. Just as a thought, just as an option, not a plan, which is somehow worse and better at the same time. Better because Brian was not about to do it that morning. Worse because Brian has apparently lived for years with the idea of it always in a drawer somewhere, close enough to reach. Once he has said it out loud, Stewie does the only thing a child can really do in that situation. He tells Brian that he loves him. He says he does not mean it in the way grown-ups mean love when they are dating. He means it in the way you love a person you cannot live without. He tells Brian he is his only friend. He tells Brian that Brian gives his own life meaning and purpose. He asks Brian to stay. He asks, through tears, if Brian will please stay and read him a story and hold him for a while. Brian sits back and reads to him. They fall asleep on the floor of the vault together. When morning comes, the bank opens. The vault door swings wide. Brian, still carrying the baby he almost did not live to see grow up, walks out into the daylight. That is the last shot of the episode. For a show that made its name on a cutaway about the Kool-Aid Man, this was a gigantic risk. Producers do not normally put an entire main character suicide conversation on network television inside a comedy. Writers do not normally turn over an entire runtime to two characters talking in one room. The show had never done it before. They have never done it since. The whole experiment, from the moment the idea was pitched, was the kind of thing that makes network people nervous. Critics were divided. Some called the gross out stuff a waste of 20 of the best minutes Family Guy had ever been allowed to air. Others, the ones who sat through it, admitted that the second half of the episode was one of the most thoughtful, mature things the show had ever done. A writer at one of the big magazines called the episode thoughtful and mature under all the disgusting parts, and said there was real discussion of suicide and of what love means in the middle of suicide. Another critic called the episode tedious and by the end sentimental. A third critic said the diaper eating gag was the grossest moment in the show's entire history and the hardest to watch. All of these opinions can be true at the same time. That is what makes the episode so strange. It is gross and profound in the same 22 minutes. It tries to hide its own tenderness under a pile of toilet humor. And for most people who watched it live in 2010, it was the first time a cartoon they had been laughing at for a decade looked them in the eye and said something that actually weighed something. The bigger question the episode raises is the one most people do not want to ask. If Brian has been keeping a gun in a bank vault since before that morning, since well before the episode started, how long has he been thinking about this? The show had been telling us for years that Brian was unhappy. He was an alcoholic. He failed college. He wrote a novel that nobody read. He had a son he did not see. He dated women he did not love. He was lonely. He was a dog living in a human family and aging in dog years, which meant his time was short and he knew it. These were all running jokes. A bad relationship here, a failed book tour there, a scene of him drinking alone at the bar, a cutaway to his sad dating life, all played for laughs. None of them, before this episode, were said out loud as what they actually were. What they actually were, all along, was a portrait of someone drowning. That is the quiet power of Brian and Stewie. It does not create a new problem for Brian on the spot. It simply stops hiding from the problem Brian has always had. The gun is not a new character choice. The gun is a name being put, finally, on a sadness the show had been letting its audience laugh at for years, which also raises an uncomfortable question about the rest of the show. If this conversation is honest, if this is really who Brian has been this whole time, then every scene of him being mocked, of him being dumped, of him being humiliated by Peter or rejected by Lois or insulted by strangers at the Drunken Clam, those scenes land differently in hindsight. They are not just jokes about a loser dog anymore. They are jokes about a person who has, somewhere in the back of his mind, already started to consider the way out. That is not a reading the show forces on you. But once you have heard Brian say what he says in the vault, it is a reading that is very, very very hard to shake. The next time you see him drink a glass of whiskey alone in his bedroom, you will see it a little differently than you saw it the first time. The show did not change after Brian and Stewie. It went right back to cutaways the next week. Nobody ever brought the gun up again. Nobody ever asked Brian if he was doing all right. Stewie never once, in a later episode, checked in on him about it. It was almost as if the conversation in the vault had never happened, as if the whole episode had been a dream the two of them shared and then forgot. That is the Family Guy way. You can be honest for 22 minutes, as long as you never are again, but the fact that it happened at all is the point. The writers chose, on their 150th episode, to prove that their show could do this if it wanted to. They proved that underneath all the screaming chickens and musical numbers, two characters and a quiet room and a gun in a box could carry more weight than 100 cutaways. They proved that Family Guy had always been capable of more than it usually showed. And then, as was always going to happen, they went right back to cutaways. Because it is a very expensive thing to tell the truth every week. Still, the vault was open for 22 minutes, and in that 22 minutes, a cartoon dog spoke out loud, a feeling that real people live with every day. That is not a small thing for any TV show to do. That is especially not a small thing for a show that, most weeks, is about a fat man getting into a fight with a giant chicken. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. But if Brian and Stewie proved that Family Guy could sit in a quiet room and talk honestly for a whole episode, there was another moment in the show's history when dark content escaped the cartoon entirely and crashed into the real world. It was a single cutaway gag, a few seconds long, buried in an otherwise forgettable episode. Nobody at Fox could have guessed what was about to happen. And then, less than a month after the episode aired, the city in the joke was on every news channel in America for all the wrong reasons. Section 5. The Boston Marathon Cutaway and Turban Cowboy. Every Family Guy episode has cutaway gags, dozens of them. Most cutaways are harmless. A 3-second joke about Peter dressed as Abraham Lincoln, a 5-second joke about a commercial that never aired, a throwaway bit about a celebrity nobody has thought about in 20 years. The cutaway is the cheapest, fastest, most forgotten kind of joke the show makes. Most of the time, you laugh, you forget, and you move on. Most cutaways never cause any kind of problem. Most. There is a Family Guy episode called Turban Cowboy. It aired on March 17th, 2013 on a Sunday night, just like almost every other Family Guy episode in history. It was the 15th episode of season 11. The main plot was about Peter taking up skydiving with his friends, breaking a bunch of bones, landing in a hospital, and there befriending a Muslim man named Mahmoud. Peter, in his usual way, gets pulled into Mahmoud's world without realizing who Mahmoud really is. It turns out Mahmoud is planning a bombing. Peter, too dumb to understand until it is too late, ends up accidentally helping blow up a bridge. That is the episode. It is, on paper, a pretty standard late-season Family Guy story. A few people liked it, most critics did not. The AV Club gave it the grade of a D. Most viewers would have watched it once, chuckled at a few jokes, and moved on. Inside Turban Cowboy, around the middle of the episode, there is a cutaway gag. It lasts about 15 seconds. Peter is sitting with a talk show host, a parody version of the real sports broadcaster Bob Costas. Peter is pretending to be a marathon runner. Costas asks him about his performance in the Boston Marathon. Peter answers with a line about how he just drove his car in the race, and when there was a guy in his way, he killed him. The cutaway shows Peter in a car, speeding through a crowd of runners, hitting them one after another, mowing them down. Then the scene is over. The show moves on. A new cutaway, about Peter imagining a date with an actor named Nathan Lane, plays right after it. Then, back to the skydiving plot. That cutaway sat inside that episode for less than 20 seconds of runtime. It was one joke among hundreds that week. It aired once, to around 5 million viewers, most of whom probably did not even think hard about it. Then the episode ended. Then the next week's episode came on. Then the week after that. 3 weeks passed. Then, on April 15th, 2013, something real happened at the actual Boston Marathon. Two brothers placed homemade bombs built inside pressure cookers near the finish line of the race. The bombs went off 14 seconds apart, roughly 200 yards from each other. 3 people were killed. Hundreds more were hurt. 17 people lost arms or legs. The bombing was national news within minutes. For a week, it was the only story in America. Every TV channel, every newspaper, every phone notification. The city of Boston was locked down while police searched for the suspects. The country grieved. Families got bad news. And somewhere in the middle of that week, somebody sitting at a computer remembered a cutaway from 3 weeks earlier. They remembered Peter driving a car through a crowd of runners at the Boston Marathon. They remembered the explosion of a bridge later in the same episode. So they took those two scenes from two different parts of Turban Cowboy and put put them together. They edited them. They made it look as if Peter, in the cartoon, had not only run the runners over, but had also set off a bomb at the race. They posted the edited clip online. The clip spread fast. Because of the editing, it looked, for a few seconds, as if Family Guy had somehow predicted the Boston Marathon bombing. It was not true. The cutaway and the explosion happened at different points in the original episode, and neither of them involved bombs exploding at the marathon. The bomb in the episode was on a bridge, much later, and had nothing to do with the running scene. But if you had not watched Turban Cowboy recently, you would not know that. You would just see a cartoon that looked like it was showing the worst attack on American soil that year, only 3 weeks before the real one happened. The clip got picked up by a conspiracy theorist named Alex Jones, who ran a website called InfoWars. Jones had built his whole career out of claiming that almost every major news event was some kind of hidden plot. He posted the edited video to his site. He posted it on social media. He told his audience that Family Guy had somehow known about the bombing in advance. He told them this was proof of something bigger. He made the clip bigger than it would ever have been on its own. Thousands of people who had never seen the actual episode ended up seeing the fake version and believing the fake version was real. Seth MacFarlane, who does not usually post much about his own show, went on the social network then called Twitter and put out a short statement. He said the edited Family Guy clip going around was abhorrent. He said the Boston bombing was a crime and a tragedy, and that his thoughts were with the victims. That is a strong word, abhorrent, and he used it about the hoax video, not about the bombing itself, which he was only sad about. His point was clear. He was furious at whoever had cut the episode together to look like something it was not. But the damage was done. People were comparing a real-life disaster to a cartoon cutaway. Families were grieving. The internet was feeding them conspiracies. And Fox, the network, had to make a decision about the episode very quickly. Fox pulled Turban Cowboy. They pulled it off their own website, fox.com. They pulled it off Hulu. They pulled it off Amazon. A representative told the press that the network had no immediate plans to air the episode again. In a normal week, Turban Cowboy would have kept playing in reruns, kept sitting on streaming services, kept being just another forgotten episode. Now, it was locked away. It was not just Turban Cowboy either. Fox also pulled a completely unrelated episode of the live-action sitcom New Girl, because that episode contained a throwaway line about a suspicious-looking duffel bag. That is how cautious the network was being. Anything that could even look like it was joking about the bombing was being taken down fast. Turban Cowboy stayed gone from streaming for almost a decade. It was not until September of 2022, more than 9 years after the attack, that Hulu quietly put it back on the service. Even now, on Disney's streaming platforms in the United States, the episode is not always available the same way the rest of the show is. It is still treated, by the people who own the show, as something that should be handled carefully. Two things are worth pulling apart here. The first is what the original cutaway actually was. The second is what people turned it into. The original cutaway, the real one, is a classic piece of Family Guy humor. It is the kind of joke the show does all the time. A character is asked about an event they did not really do. They make a terrible, made-up answer. The answer is played for a shocked laugh. Family Guy has done this gag 100 times. They have done it with presidents, with wars, with natural disasters. In this case, the joke was that Peter was so stupid and self-centered that his plan to win a marathon was to drive a car through the runners. The joke is on Peter. Peter is the idiot. You are supposed to think that is a ridiculous answer. You are not supposed to think the show is glorifying mass murder. The original scene, on its own, in its original context, is a standard Family Guy cutaway. The edited version is a completely different thing. Someone took two scenes in two different places in the same episode and pasted them together to manufacture a video that did not exist in the real show. That person then fed it to an audience ready to believe the worst. By the time anybody tried to explain the truth, the fake version had already spread all over the internet. For a lot of people, the fake version became the version they remembered. For the rest of their lives, they would talk about the time Family Guy predicted the Boston Marathon bombing, and it did not. Not even close. The edit was the lie. The original scene was just a dumb joke. But the show had to live with both, because once something spreads online, you do not get it back. Fox pulling the episode was not really about protecting the show. It was about protecting themselves from association with a tragedy. That is a very different thing. It is what networks always do when something on their air accidentally ends up connected to a real-world event. You pull the thing, you apologize, you wait for the cycle to move on. Eventually, you quietly put the episode back. This whole mess is useful for understanding something deeper about Family Guy. The show's whole style is built on the cutaway. cutaway. The cutaway is a machine that produces jokes about subjects the show otherwise would not have the time or space to deal with. The whole idea of a cutaway is that you can joke about anything in a few seconds, because the joke is over before anybody has the time to feel anything about it. That speed is the point. You are not supposed to linger on the image of Peter running over runners. You are supposed to laugh for a half second and then move on to the next cutaway about Peter as Abraham Lincoln. That is how the machine works. The machine works because nothing in the cutaway is supposed to be connected to the real world. Every cutaway lives inside its own tiny joke universe, sealed off from anything serious. As long as that seal holds, the show can get away with almost anything. As long as the joke stays inside the cartoon is free. Turban Cowboy is the moment the seal broke. A real-world event happened that was close enough in shape and in feeling to a specific cutaway that the cutaway could no longer be laughed at. The moment 3 people died at the finish line of the Boston Marathon, the joke about Peter driving his car through runners at the Boston Marathon became something different. Not because the joke itself had changed, but because the world around the joke had. Comedy works by distance. There was no distance left, so the network took the joke off the air. That is the part of the Turban Cowboy story that fans of the show do not always think about. The writers did nothing wrong. The writers did not predict anything. The writers did not know. 3 weeks earlier, they had written what they thought was a silly joke, the way they had written 1,000 silly jokes before it. The joke had aired to a normal Sunday night audience. Nobody, at that point, had complained. Nobody had taken it as a serious thing. It was one of the many dozens of cutaways Family Guy had run that season. Then a real attack happened, and a random stranger made a fake video, and suddenly the writer's room was being blamed for predicting something they never even thought about. The Turban Cowboy story is also a story about the strange power of editing. One person with a computer and some free software can, in a few minutes, make millions of people believe a cartoon said something it never said. The makers of the show had no way to fight that directly. They did not make the fake. They could only stand there, alongside the rest of us, watching the fake version of their own work do more damage than their real work ever had. It is worth remembering, too, that Turban Cowboy was not a loved episode. It already had bad reviews before any of this happened. Critics disliked the main plot. Some viewers felt that the portrayal of Muslim characters in the episode leaned on old, tired stereotypes. The show had done something similar many times before. A couple of the jokes were lazy, even by Family Guy standards. So the episode was already a weak one, floating near the bottom of the season, on its way to being forgotten, when the bombing happened and pulled it up into the spotlight for the worst possible reason. The cutaway got a second life nobody wanted for it. It is now, arguably, the single most remembered scene in the episode. Not because it was clever, not because it was funny, not because it made any kind of point, but because it was close, by accident, to a real tragedy. That is a terrible way to be famous. A joke that was meant to last 15 seconds got locked into cultural memory for an entirely different reason than its writers intended. A disaster did not make the joke funnier. A disaster made the joke impossible to laugh at. That is the cost of a show that jokes about everything. Most weeks, nothing happens. The cutaways about bombs and war and murder and disasters sail past the audience, get their laugh, and disappear into the blur of 1,000 other cutaways. Then one week, the world moves. The cutaway does not move with it, and the show has to answer, or go quiet, or pull the episode, or hope the whole thing blows over. Family Guy is still making cutaways. The show did not change its style after Turban Cowboy. It could not. The cutaway is the show. Remove the cutaway and you do not have Family Guy anymore. All the writers could do was the thing they did, which was to put out a statement, let the network pull the episode, and wait. Almost a decade later, the episode is back on streaming. Most fans have seen it by now. Most do not even remember what the fuss was about. The cutaway is just another cutaway, except it is not. It is the one that taught the writers, whether they liked it or not, that jokes do not always stay inside the cartoon. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. But if Turban Cowboy was the moment a Family Guy cutaway collided with the real world, there is one episode in the show's entire run that does not need any real-world event to feel wrong. The darkness is built right into it. For one uninterrupted hour of television, broadcast on a December Sunday in 2010, the show turned a cheerful Christmas special into something out of a horror movie. There were sick, dying elves. There was a suicidal Santa. There was a beating with a baseball bat. And somewhere, underneath all of it, the writers were trying, in their own strange way, to tell you something about what consumers had done to the world. Section 6, Road to the North Pole and the darkest Christmas special on network television. Christmas specials are supposed to do one job. They are supposed to make you feel warm. That is the whole deal. A Christmas special, by its very nature, is a piece of TV designed designed to run in the background of a cozy living room in December with the tree lit up, the snow outside the window, and somebody eating cookies on the couch. Even bad Christmas specials know the assignment. They may be cheap, they may be silly, they may lean too hard on the same 4 songs, but they will, in the end, hug you. They will tell you that Santa is real, that family is everything, that the world is a kind place, that the magic is saved, that the children are laughing, that the snow is clean. That is the deal. That is what the word Christmas means on television. In December of 2010, Family Guy broke the deal. The episode is called Road to the North Pole. It was made as a double-length special, meaning it was put together from 2 half-hour episodes stitched into one. It aired on Fox on December 12, 2010, as the 7th episode of Season 9. The writers were Chris Sheridan and Danny Smith. The director was Greg Colton. The episode was narrated by Ron MacFarlane, which is Seth MacFarlane's real-life father. It contained 3 original songs, including one called Christmas Time is Killing Us, which was later nominated for an Emmy for its music and lyrics. It was hyped before it aired as a holiday special. It was promoted with the warm, cheerful clips you would expect from any seasonal episode. People sat down in their living rooms with their families, expecting a Family Guy version of a Christmas movie. They got something else. The episode opens with a big musical number, which is a good sign. The Griffins and the people of Quahog sing about everything they want for Christmas. Peter wants a pile of random garbage. Lois wants to go to Spain. Chris wants a movie actress. Meg wants a fancy car. The neighbors chime in. Herbert wants a drummer boy. Quagmire wants something unspeakable. It goes on. It is funny and sharp and sets up a world where Christmas has become a pile of selfish wants. Stewie, being Stewie, gets obsessed with writing to Santa because he is still young enough to half believe. Brian, being Brian, tries to protect him from being disappointed. Brian takes Stewie to the mall to meet Santa. The mall Santa is exhausted, rude, and dismissive. He hurries Stewie off his lap without really listening. Stewie, furious, decides that this insulting man must be the real Santa, and that the real Santa must be punished. He grabs Brian and forces him to drive the two of them to the North Pole. Brian tries everything to stop him. He tricks him by pulling up to a Santa-themed carnival and claiming they have arrived. Stewie does not fall for it. They travel on. At one point, Stewie hitches a ride with a truck driver, accidentally sets off a flare inside the cab, and causes the truck to crash in flames. They keep going. They run out of gas. They spend a night in an abandoned cabin. They push on through the snow on foot. Slowly, they are moving from a silly road trip into something colder and darker. Then they arrive. The North Pole, in Road to the North Pole, is not a North Pole you have ever seen in a Christmas special before. There is no gingerbread. There is no cheerful elf village. There is no warm cottage with smoke from the chimney. What Stewie and Brian find is a sprawling, gray industrial factory spitting toxic smoke into the sky. The ground around it is dead. The air is poisoned. There are no decorations. There is no music coming from inside. It looks like a polluting steel plant in the middle of a frozen wasteland. And it is. The elves are the first thing they see. These are not the elves you know from any other Christmas story. Decades of being forced to produce more and more toys year after year, without rest, without enough workers, without better tools, have left them broken. The factory has responded to rising demand by forcing the elves to have children with each other to make more workers. Those children were born twisted and deformed because of the closed family tree. Those children then had their own children. The result, by the time Stewie and Brian arrive, is a population of sick, mutated, exhausted little creatures who can barely stand. Some of them are missing limbs. Some of them are covered in sores. Some of them are so beaten down that, the show tells us, they wander out into the snow to die on purpose. The episode does not look away from any of this. It lingers on the elves. It gives you time to see how bad it has gotten. Worse, the reindeer have turned. Years of watching the elves die in the cold have turned the reindeer into meat eaters. When an elf stumbles out of the factory, too tired or sick or sad to go back, the reindeer swarm them and tear them apart. Santa says, watching one of these attacks through a window, that he has stopped even praying for the elves. He does not see the point anymore. He asks, out loud, what kind of God would allow any of this? He hints that he has lost his faith entirely and found a new one because the old one does not answer. This is a Christmas special on Fox in December, before dinner, with children in the room. This is Santa Claus on primetime television saying that he no longer believes in God. Santa himself is the biggest shock. This is not the round, rosy man you know. This Santa is gaunt, thin to the point of starving, with dark circles under his eyes and a trembling voice. He has not slept properly in years. He is so sick that, during his first scene with Stewie and Brian, he collapsed collapses. He vomits blood. He ends up on life support. At one point, he begs Stewie to go ahead and kill him because he wants the pain to end. Stewie, the toddler who came all this way to shoot the man, cannot do it. The show has turned Stewie's childish murder plot into something he does not have the stomach to finish because the target is already dying. Brian and Stewie decide that the only thing they can do is take over for Santa for the night. They fly his sleigh back out into the world with a full cargo of presents, hoping to save Christmas for the millions of children expecting gifts in the morning. What happens next is one of the most talked about scenes the show has ever run. They pick a random house, supposedly the first on their list, and land on the roof. They break in. They begin what they believe is a standard Santa-style delivery. Midway through, the family wakes up and catches them. Panic follows. Brian and Stewie, in a complete loss of judgment, decide to silence the family. They beat the parents unconscious. Stewie uses a baseball bat, which was supposed to be one of the gifts, to strike a man repeatedly. They tie the daughter up with duct tape so she cannot scream. Then, only after they have done all of this, they check their list and realize they are at the wrong house. The whole attack was a mistake. They leave without delivering any of the presents, with that family bloody and tied up behind them, and rush off to try to salvage the night. They fail. By sunrise, they have only managed to deliver a few random things to a few random people. The morning comes. The world wakes up to empty Christmas trees. Children cry. Parents panic. The most important holiday in the cartoon version of America has effectively been canceled. Brian and Stewie do the one thing left to them. They go on live television and speak directly to the world. They explain in plain terms what they saw at the North Pole. They describe the sick elves. They describe the dying Santa. They describe what has happened to the magic. They tell the whole planet that Christmas, as everybody knows it, is killing the very people who make it possible. Their ask is small and simple. They ask every person watching all over the world to limit themselves to asking for only one gift per Christmas from now on, to give Santa and his workers a real chance to survive. The world, seeing what it has done, agrees. The show gives you a happy ending, of sorts. A year later, the episode returns to the North Pole. Santa is healthy. The factory is a cottage again. The elves are well. The reindeer are friendly. The sky is blue. Everything is the way it looks in every other Christmas special. You are supposed to feel warm. You are supposed to feel that the lesson was learned. And yet, you cannot really feel warm because you have seen the other version. You have seen the scrawny Santa and the mutated elves and the carnivorous reindeer and the wrong house. That is the trick of the episode. The ending is soft, but the middle is not. The middle is the part that sticks. The middle is the reason Family Guy fans, years later, still rank this among the show's darkest hours, even though it is technically a Christmas feel-good story. The reaction at the time was what you would expect. The group called the Parents Television Council, a conservative watchdog organization that had been complaining about Family Guy for years, named Road to the North Pole their worst TV show of the week for the week it aired. They were not really angry about the message. They were angry about how the message was delivered. They pointed out the baseball bat scene. They pointed out the sexual content tucked into the songs. They pointed out the appearance of Ron McFarlane, the creator's own father, giving a narration with some inappropriate lines. They called the show nauseating. Their words, not mine. Other critics saw the same episode very differently. A reviewer at a popular TV site called it a satisfying episode full of funny gags and nice moments, and praised the way the writers had kept piling more and more horrors on top of each other until the whole thing became, somehow, darkly funny. That reviewer gave the episode one of the highest grades the show had received in years. A second reviewer praised the songs and the portrayal of Santa's workshop, but worried that the message was pushed too hard. A third reviewer had mixed feelings. She said the ending was hopeful, but that the hour had made her uncomfortable in a way Family Guy usually does not. The message itself is worth unpacking, because it is rare for Family Guy to have a message at all. What the episode is saying, in its own loud, gross, scary way, is that Christmas has become a nightmare because human beings are asking for too much. The mall Santa in the opening is rude because he is burnt out. The factory is polluted because production has to keep growing. The elves are deformed because the workforce has to keep breeding. The reindeer are monsters because no one has cared for them in a very long time. Santa himself is dying because the demands placed on him have become impossible. Every bad thing in the episode is caused by one thing: too many people asking for too much stuff. That is not a Family Guy joke. That is a real point dressed in cartoon violence. The episode is, underneath everything, a loud Christmas sermon against greed. It is the most sincere thing the show had done up to that year. sincere. And because Family Guy is Family Guy, the sincerity is wrapped in blood and vomit and mutated children. You cannot have the message without the horror. The horror is what forces the viewer to take the message seriously. If the episode had been a gentle fable about being less selfish, nobody would have watched it. By making it as dark as it is, the writers made sure you could not look away. The songs are the other thing to talk about. The big number, Christmas Time is Killing Us, is played during a montage of Santa breaking down, the factory grinding on, and the elves losing their minds. The song itself is bouncy, catchy, a big, bright, Broadway-style chorus. The kind of song you could easily put on a children's holiday record. The mismatch between the cheerful song and the awful images is the whole point. The writers are showing you what Christmas looks like behind the curtain, and they are making it sing about itself while you watch. The song was nominated for a real Emmy Award, which is rare for a Family Guy song, and even rarer for a song attached to content this dark. The industry, somehow, recognized the craft even when it could barely stomach the subject matter. The strangest thing about Road to the North Pole is how much of it sticks. Fans who have not watched the episode in years will still, if you ask them, mention the reindeer. They will mention the elf being eaten. They will mention Santa's face. They will mention the wrong house. They will mention the ending, but only after they have listed the rest first. It is an episode that lives in the body more than in the head. It uses every tool Family Guy has, musical numbers and cutaways and voice actors and animation, and turns them all toward one goal, which is to scare you into thinking about how much Christmas actually costs. Not many Christmas specials have ever done that. Not many Christmas specials would ever be allowed to try. Family Guy, because it is Family Guy, was allowed to try. And what they made, whether you liked it or hated it, whether you laughed or turned the TV off, was a piece of television that almost nobody who watched it has ever forgotten. It is a Christmas special that does not belong on the shelf with the cheerful ones. It belongs in its own small corner, next to the Christmas horror movies that dare to ask what the holiday actually is, and at what cost it keeps running year after year. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. But if Road to the North Pole was the show turning its darkness outward toward a holiday and a planet, there was another episode, a year later, where the show turned its darkness inward, on a single member of its own cast. For 20 years, one character in Family Guy has been the family's target. Every week, in almost every episode, one of the Griffins says or does something cruel to her. The audience had laughed along for years. Then, in 2011, the writers finally gave her a microphone and let her say out loud what it felt like. And the ending of what she said is the part nobody has ever been able to forgive. Section 7. The Meg Problem. Seahorse Seashell Party, and a show that admitted it was abusing its own character. Meg Griffin is the oldest child in the Griffin family. She is a teenage girl. She has glasses, a pink beanie, a shy voice, and almost no friends. That is all you need to know to understand her, because the show itself has never really cared to tell you anything else. For over 20 years, Meg has existed on Family Guy for one reason, and that reason is to be the person in the room that everyone else hates. Her own father hates her. Peter makes fun of Meg in almost every episode. He calls her ugly, he forgets her birthday, he forgets her name. He has, on multiple occasions, pretended he does not know her when strangers ask. Lois, her mother, is not much better. Lois ignores Meg. Lois tells Meg she is disappointing. Lois has, in several episodes, openly said she wishes she had never had her. Chris, Meg's brother, joins in whenever the rest of the family starts. Brian and Stewie treat her as a punchline. Even strangers on the street in Quahog insult her for no reason. Every week, for 2 decades, Meg Griffin has walked into a room and something mean has happened to her before she could leave. When the show first came back from its cancellation in the mid-2000s, the writers made a choice. They knew fans did not love Meg. She had been boring in the first few seasons. She had not caught on. Instead of fixing her, they leaned the other way. They decided the joke was that nobody liked Meg. Every time Meg did or said anything, they would have one of the other characters shoot her down. That became the rhythm of her entire presence on the show. Meg would speak, Peter would tell her to shut up. Audience would laugh, move on. For years, this was just the shape of the show. People who liked Family Guy knew it. People who disliked Family Guy used it as evidence. The writers at the AV Club, the critics at other websites, commenters online, all of them had slowly started pointing out that there was something sour about this. A cartoon character cannot actually be hurt, which is true, but the steady drip of cruelty, week after week, year after year, aimed at the same teenage girl, started to feel like something the show was not owning up to. The writers seemed to know people had noticed, and in season 10, they tried to do something about it. The episode is called Seahorse Seashell Party. It aired on October 2nd, 2011. It is the second episode of season 10. It was made made as part of a bigger event across Fox's Sunday night cartoons, in which Family Guy, The Cleveland Show, and American Dad all ran connected episodes about a hurricane hitting their 3 fictional towns. Family Guy's piece of the event was the middle one. The hurricane arrives in Quahog. The Griffins are trapped in the house with the power out, the TV out, and nothing to do. In the background of the episode, Brian sneaks away to try psychedelic mushrooms and then spends the whole runtime having a terrifying, animated, bad trip. But that is the side plot. The main plot is Meg. With the family trapped indoors with nothing to watch, they start playing small indoor games. Peter makes up a pointless game called Finger Bang, where you point your finger at someone and yell bang. Meg joins in.
The moment she does, her father turns the game into an insult, turning the word into something sexual aimed at her body. The other family members laugh. Meg looks at them, and something, after 20 years, finally snaps. Meg stands up. She tells Chris off first. She calls him out for being the worst brother a girl could have. She tells him he has never once stood up for her. She tells him he is a coward. Chris is stunned. Then she turns to Lois. She calls out her mother for being nobody's idea of a good person. She brings up every bad thing Lois has done in past episodes, one after another, all of them real things the show had already shown. She lists Lois's shoplifting.
She lists Lois's drug use. She lists the time Lois worked as an adult film performer. She lists every man Lois has cheated with. She asks her mother, plainly, how a woman with that history has the nerve to keep judging her. Lois tries to say she is a better person now because of those experiences. Meg asks her, slowly, if that is really true. Lois starts crying. Then Meg turns to Peter. She tells her father, flat out, that he is the reason her life is miserable. She tells him that when she turns 18, she plans to never see him again. Peter, for the first time in the show's run, actually looks scared. He turns to Lois and asks her to make Meg stop. Lois refuses, because Peter did not stand up for her when Meg was going after her a minute earlier. That is the moment the whole family turns on itself. Chris, Lois, and Peter start throwing every insult they have at each other. Peter ends up reduced to tears and runs upstairs. Lois goes after him. Chris wanders off.
The living room is empty, except for Meg, alone on the couch, having finally said everything she has wanted to say for years. Now, if you stop the episode there, this is a different story. This is a story about a girl who stood up for herself. This is a story about a teenager pointing at her family and naming the truth and walking away from them for good. This could be, for a weird and special 22 minutes, an actual growing up episode, a coming-of-age story hidden inside a cutaway cartoon. That is not what the show does. What the show does next is the part fans have never been able to forget. Meg sits alone on the couch and thinks about what she has done. Brian, coming down from his mushroom trip, sits with her for a minute. She tells him that she feels bad. She tells him that she can see now what happens to the rest of the family when she is not there to absorb their cruelty. Without her to insult, they start insulting each other.
Peter, Lois, and Chris cannot stand each other when they do not have someone else to pile on. Meg decides that she must be holding the family together by being the target of all their worst feelings. So she chooses to go back to being that target on purpose. She apologizes. She tells Peter, Lois, and Chris that she was wrong to say all those things, even though they were true. She takes it all back. She invites them to go back to treating her the way they always have. The family, relieved, accepts her offer. Everybody feels better. The storm outside seems to pass. Meg has made herself into the punching bag again, on purpose, with her eyes open, because she has decided it is her job. Then the hurricane comes back. The sun outside was only the eye. The Griffins try to run back inside. Meg makes it to the door last. As she reaches it, the family locks her out, hoping the storm will kill her. That is the final joke of the episode. Critics at the time did not know what to do with it. The review at the AV Club by Kevin McFarlane gave the episode a low grade. He wrote that the ending was a half-hearted excuse for years of lazy writing. He pointed out that Family Guy had spent years taking the easy path with Meg, simply joining in with the online chorus of people who disliked her instead of ever trying to fix her or give her real stories. He wrote that one single episode of pointed, forced justification for that choice did not actually change anything. In the end, he said, the show had still spent a decade kicking a character for laughs, and one speech, no matter how good, did not undo that. Fans felt something similar, but more personally. Many viewers, especially younger ones, had seen themselves in Meg. Some of them had been bullied. Some of them had been treated badly at home. The first half of the episode spoke to them in a way very little else on TV did. Meg standing up to her family was, for those fans, the moment they had been waiting for. And then the second half of the episode pulled it away. Meg did not escape. Meg apologized for being right. Meg offered herself back up to her abusers because it would make them more comfortable. There is a word for what the episode is doing, and it is the word the critics at the time kept circling without quite saying. The lesson, whether the writers meant it or not, is that victims of bad treatment should stay and take it, because the people treating them badly will suffer if they leave. That is not the lesson anyone who has actually been through something like that wants to hear from a TV show. That is the opposite of the lesson. And yet there it is, built into the final minutes of the episode, played as the punchline. What makes Seahorse Seashell Party stand out from other dark Family Guy episodes is that it is not shocking. There is no violence. There are no strong visuals. Brian has a weird mushroom trip in the side plot, and he accidentally cuts off part of his own ear during it, which is the only really gross moment. The main plot is just a girl talking to her parents and her brother in a living room. The cruelty is quiet. The cruelty is in the ending. And because the cruelty is so well hidden, so politely delivered, it is almost harder to shake than the louder cruelty in other episodes. Think about what the writers are telling you. They are telling you, in their own words, through Meg herself, that Meg understands she is being abused. They are telling you she knows it. They are telling you she could walk away and that the walk would be fair. And then they are telling you she chooses not to because she sees herself as a tool her family uses to stay sane. She is the lightning rod. She keeps the storm off the rest of the house by standing outside in it. That is a grim picture. That is a grim picture to paint in a cartoon inside a family comedy about a teenage girl. The one thing you can say in the episode's defense is that it forced the conversation to happen. Before Seahorse Seashell Party, the way Family Guy treated Meg was almost invisible. It was just the background noise of the show. After this episode, viewers could no longer pretend the pattern was not there. The writers themselves had stood up and said openly that they knew what they were doing. That admission, even if the ending tried to wave it away, changed the way some fans watched the show. After Meg's speech, every Peter hates Meg joke in every later episode was a little harder to laugh at because the show had, on record, told you that Meg knows. The joke does not stop working for everybody, but for the people who paid attention, the joke was never quite the same. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. And that may be the real story here. Not the speech, not the ending, but the choice the writers made to look straight at a problem they had created, wink at the audience about it, and then keep doing it anyway for another decade and counting. There is only one other character in the show who has been treated as a long-running joke, whose real meaning the writers have refused to face. He is not a family member, he is a neighbor. And unlike Meg, he is not the target of cruelty, he is the source of it. Section 8. Herbert the pervert, the running joke that stopped being funny. Every Family Guy viewer knows him when they see him. He is thin, he is old, he has a light, high, whispery voice that sounds almost gentle. He wears a pale blue bathrobe and slippers. He uses a walker because of his age. He has a tired old dog named Jessie who cannot use its back legs. He lives a few doors down from the Griffins on Spooner Street. His full name in the show is John Herbert, but the fans, and the show itself, have had only one nickname for him for more than 20 years. They call him Herbert the Pervert. The character first appeared in a season 3 episode called To Love and Die in Dixie, which aired in 2001. In that first scene, Chris Griffin is out delivering newspapers. He rides his bike up to Herbert's house. Herbert, standing at his door in that pale blue robe, invites Chris inside. He tells Chris that he has popsicles down in his basement and that Chris should come and get one. The way Herbert says it, the slow voice, the too wide smile, the awkward pause, tells the audience in about 3 seconds what kind of man this is. Chris, being Chris, does not pick up on it. He simply says no and goes about his paper route. That is the joke of the first scene. An old man made a move on a 14-year-old boy. The boy did not notice, and the scene ended. Laugh track would have played, if the show used one. The character was invented almost by accident. The voice actor behind him, a man named Mike Henry, told the gaming website IGN in an old interview that Herbert started out as a voice he used to mess around with in the writer's room. It was based on an imitation of certain old men he had grown up around in Virginia. At the time, it was not meant to be a serious part of any character. Henry pitched one joke in the writer's room about Herbert having a crush on Chris Griffin. The joke landed. The other writers laughed. That was it. That one pitch, one laugh, decided the shape of this character forever. From that moment on, Herbert was not just a weird old man. He was a specific kind of weird old man. He was the kind the show would not name directly, but whose behavior it would dress up in jokes again and again. The show has never pretended otherwise. In fact, they made it official official on paper. In an episode called Peter Peter Pumpkin Cheater, Herbert is shown introducing himself to the neighborhood. He cheerfully tells people that he is a registered sex offender. That is a legal term. Registered sex offenders, in the real world, are people who have been convicted of certain crimes and whose names and addresses are kept on a public list. The show is, in that moment, telling you directly what Herbert is. He is not just a grown man who acts strange around kids. He is, inside the world of the show, a man the police and the government already know about. He has a record. Almost every Herbert scene from then on plays off of that. In a season 4 episode called The Courtship of Stewie's Father, Chris breaks a window at Herbert's house with a baseball. To make it up, Chris is told to go over and help Herbert with chores. Herbert, of course, is delighted. He keeps Chris around for as long as he can. At one point, Herbert sits Chris down for a meal and has a souvenir picture taken of the two of them together. In a later episode, called Play It Again, Brian, Peter, and Lois, looking for a babysitter, hire Herbert to watch Chris, Stewie, and Meg. Herbert accepts, promising to wear his best clothes. He makes it clear, in song, that he is excited about one of the kids and does not care about the others. When Meg is the only one who bathes him, he is openly disappointed. The pattern keeps going across the seasons. Herbert is shown lurking outside in Chris's bedroom in one episode. Herbert is shown singing the words of a famous rock song to a young boy in another episode, changing the song into something that feels wrong just from the context. Herbert buys an ice cream truck at one point and uses it to drive through neighborhoods, which, the show implies, is not really about selling ice cream at all.
In one episode, an episode where a serious murder mystery is actually the main plot, Herbert takes Chris aside and tells him that if Herbert ever dies, Chris must go to Herbert's house and burn it down so that nobody will find what is hidden inside. The show does not spell out what is hidden. The show does not need to. The implication is clear. Herbert has illegal material involving children somewhere in his home, and he has planned for a teenage boy to destroy the evidence after his death. Every one of these scenes is played as a joke. The music is light, the voice is soft. The scenes are usually short. They come and go in about a minute or two each, and then the show moves back to Peter or Stewie or Brian. Herbert is what the show calls a side character. He shows up to deliver a quick, dark laugh and then leaves. Over the course of more than 20 years, he has appeared in dozens and dozens of episodes,
always doing the same kind of thing. He is not a changing character. He does not grow. He does not get caught. He does not go to jail. He does not stop. His whole function, week after week after week, is to be the neighborhood man with a crush on the neighborhood boy. That is the joke. That is the only joke. The show has been telling that one joke in different outfits for the entire life of Herbert as a character. And that is what has slowly, over the years, turned the joke sour for a lot of people. Writers at one of the biggest pop culture review sites, the AV Club, have called Herbert, in plain words, a black hole of bad qualities whose every appearance brings out the worst tendencies of Family Guy. That is strong language for a throwaway side character. The reviewers at that site are not known for overreacting. They watch the show every week. They have, over time, started pointing out that Herbert is a joke that the show keeps making, even though almost nobody involved seems to find it fresh anymore. He is not funny in the way the early Peter Griffin jokes were funny. He is not surprising. He is not clever. He is just dark, and the show keeps bringing him back. The defense you sometimes hear from fans is that he is a cartoon and not a real person. They are right about that. He is a cartoon, but the behavior he is shown doing week after week is not a cartoon behavior. It is a real behavior. There are real children in the real world who have been approached by real men who offered them sweets and asked them to come down into the basement. There are real children who have been followed home from their paper routes. There are real survivors of that kind of thing, and many of them, as adults, have said publicly that watching those scenes is hard for them. One survivor of childhood abuse wrote a long, painful open letter online a few years ago, asking the makers of the show to stop using Herbert as comedic relief, arguing that each scene makes the real thing feel more acceptable. That letter is still out there. It is one of many. The people asking for Herbert to be retired are not all angry internet strangers. Some of them are the exact people the character's behavior, if it were real, would have hurt. Chris himself, inside the show, has been made aware of Herbert at least once. In a season 6 episode called Movin' Out, Herbert reads Chris a bedtime story. At the end of the story, Chris asks Herbert, using a real and legal word for the behavior, whether he is in fact that kind of person. The show does not let Herbert answer. It cuts away. That is the show, in its own way, admitting that even the characters know. They just do not do anything about it. Here is the part that makes the joke even harder to dismiss. In a later episode, Peter and Lois and the other neighbors are not in the dark about Herbert. They have seen him him around Chris. They have seen his behavior. They have heard what he sings. They have watched him drive an ice cream truck around children. They know. They keep letting him near their son anyway. The show has never really treated that as a problem. It has treated that as the background. Chris lives his life. Peter and Lois live theirs. Herbert watches. Nothing changes. Nobody calls the police. Nobody changes the locks. Nobody tells Herbert to stay away. The voice actor Mike Henry has stayed with Herbert for over 2 decades. He has defended the character over the years. In the interview quoted earlier, he said, almost offhandedly, that his original idea had not been a man who goes after children. He had just been playing dirty old men from his hometown, and the writers had seen the crush joke land and ran with it. In other words,
the darkness was not planned from the start. The darkness happened because the first mean joke got a laugh, and the laugh became the identity. That is a tiny example of how a show this old keeps making the same choice. A joke lands once. A whole character gets built on top of it. 20 years go by. The joke keeps getting told. Nobody ever takes it away. Some fans have pointed out, fairly, that Herbert is not a total monster on the show. In one episode called German Guy, Herbert saves Chris from an old Nazi who is holding Chris and Peter hostage. Herbert in that scene is brave. He fights the Nazi off. He clearly cares about Chris. The show uses this moment to suggest that Herbert is not 100% a threat, that he has feelings that are not only dangerous, that he, in his own twisted way, does love Chris and does want him safe. For some fans, that scene softens him. For others, it makes him worse. A man who has been shown for years as a danger to children, who is now also being shown as having real feelings for one of those children, is not a less uncomfortable character. He is, if anything, a more uncomfortable one. The love does not make the creep go away. The love is part of the creep. Here is the simplest way to put it. Family Guy has made its name by joking about everything. The thing is, everything includes choices. The show chose to bring Herbert back for every single season of its run. It chose, week after week, to let him deliver the same joke. It chose, over 2 decades, to never let anything real happen to him. No arrest, no consequence. No storyline where he crosses a line the show is no longer willing to help him hide. He is the thing the show keeps. A child-craving old man in a blue robe who is allowed, inside the universe of the cartoon, to roam free forever. That is not an accident. That is a decision made many, many times by many writers in many rooms across many years. The quiet truth about Herbert is that he is not really a running joke. He is a running promise. The show is promising you every time he shows up that no matter how dark this kind of humor is, it will not change. The walker will creak. The blue robe will flutter. Jessie the dog will drag itself along behind him. And somewhere nearby, there will always be a boy, usually Chris, and the boy will not know. And the adults will not act. And the show will cut away before anyone has to deal with what any of this means. That is the deal. That is the show. __quote_7__. But if Herbert is the character the show keeps, even when the world changes around him, there is another moment in Family Guy's dark history when the outside world refused to stay quiet. A real, living, famous American politician, a woman who had run for the second highest office in the country, went on national television and called the show's writers cold-hearted and cruel. She wanted an apology. She did not get one. What she got instead was a response from a person she had not even known existed, delivered in a voice she had not expected, pointing at her in return from a place Sarah Palin would not have ever guessed. Section 9. The Sarah Palin Incident, Extra-Large Medium, and the Down Syndrome Controversy. In the history of Family Guy, there is exactly one moment where the show took on a real American politician, by name, in an episode, and the politician fired back publicly on national news the very next day. It is a story most casual fans do not remember in full. They remember the fight. They do not always remember who won it. And the person who really did the winning was not Seth MacFarlane and not Sarah Palin. It was a woman neither of them had expected to hear from at all, and she had something to say to both of them. The episode is called Extra Large Medium. It is the 12th episode of Season 8. It aired on Valentine's Day, February 14th, 2010. It was written by Steve Callahan. It was directed by John Holmquist. On the surface, it is a normal Family Guy episode. There are 2 plots running at the same time. In the first one, Peter convinces himself he has magical powers after Chris and Stewie get temporarily lost during a family hike. He starts offering fake psychic readings to the town. That is the side plot.
plot. It ends, as most side plots on this show end, with Peter being ridiculous and eventually getting caught. The main plot is about Chris. Chris has developed a crush on a girl at his school named Ellen. The show makes clear very quickly that Ellen has Down syndrome. For those who do not know, Down syndrome is a condition that a person is born with. People with it can look a little different, learn at their own pace, and often need support in some parts of life. Plenty of adults with Down syndrome hold jobs, live on their own, fall in love, and do all the things anyone else does. In the episode, Chris wants to ask Ellen out on a Valentine's Day date. Stewie helps him get ready with a big song and dance number. Chris eventually takes Ellen out. The date itself, inside the episode, is not what caused the problem. Ellen turns out to be rude and self-centered, which is played as a small twist. The show's quiet point there is that not every person with Down syndrome is a perfect little angel the way TV usually shows them. Some are nice, some are mean. Ellen, in this story, happens to be mean. The writers seemed proud of that choice because it treated her as an actual human being who could have a bad personality. The voice actress who played Ellen, as it turns out, agreed. More on her in a moment. What caused the fight was a single line of dialogue. During the date, Ellen tells Chris a little about her family. She says her father is an accountant and her mother is the former governor of Alaska. Those two words, former governor of Alaska, are the whole controversy. In the real world, at the time the episode aired, exactly one woman had ever been the governor of Alaska. Her name was Sarah Palin. 2 years earlier, in 2008, she had been the Republican Party's pick to run for Vice President of the United States. She lost. By 2010, she had left the governor's office and had become a regular presence on American television, where she worked as a commentator for Fox News, the same network's news channel that shares a corporate family with the Fox channel Family Guy aired on. Sarah Palin also had a young son named Trig. Trig had been born in 2008, and from very early on, she and her family had been open with the public about the fact that Trig had Down syndrome. So when Ellen, a character with Down syndrome on Family Guy, said her mother was the former governor of Alaska, everyone watching understood. There was no name said out loud. There did not need to be one. Sarah Palin had a child with Down syndrome, and the episode was lining up Ellen's fictional mother with her. That was the joke. That was the whole joke. It was 4 seconds of dialogue in a half-hour cartoon. Sarah Palin did not see it as a joke. Within days of the episode airing, she wrote a post on her social media account calling the line a kick in the gut. Her daughter Bristol also wrote her own post, calling the writers of the show heartless jerks. Then Sarah Palin went on the cable news show The O'Reilly Factor, which aired on Fox News, to speak about it face to face. She used very specific words. She said the people who made the show were cruel, cold-hearted people. She asked, on camera, when enough was going to be enough. She pointed out that her son, who was very young at the time, was a real human being, not a joke. Her point was that the episode was making fun of her child for having Down syndrome, using him as a way to hurt her. The reaction from her camp was loud and it was instant. Fox News covered it. Other news channels followed, partly because the story had a strange shape to it. The network that aired the show was part of the same larger company that owned the network where the real governor was working. Rupert Murdoch, the man at the top of both Fox and Fox News, had been the one in charge when the episode was allowed to air. That irony was not lost on anyone. The show was taking a shot at a star of its sister channel. The corporation was, in a way, at war with itself. Seth MacFarlane responded in his own way, from his own side. In an interview with the Los Angeles Times, he defended the show. He said Family Guy was built on satire, which is a word meaning making fun of people in power to make a point. He said his show was an equal opportunity offender, by which he meant that they made fun of everybody, not just one group. The writer of the episode, Steve Callahan, made a joke about it that summer at a fan convention in San Diego. He said, laughing, that the next season he had decided to try to offend smart people instead, to balance things out. That was MacFarlane's team's whole response. Short, dry, unapologetic. And then, while the fight was happening on television and online and in print, a third voice entered the story. Nobody on either side had expected it. Her name was Andrea Faye Friedman. She was an actress. She had been working in television and film since the early 1990s. She had starred in a show called Life Goes On. She had guest starred in a serious crime show called Law and Order Special Victims Unit. She had appeared in a film called Smudge that won a real humanitarian award. She had been around for a while. She was known for being a working actress with a long list of jobs. Andrea Faye Friedman, in real life, had Down syndrome. She had been born with it. She was proud of who she was. And she was the person who had voiced Ellen in that Family Guy episode. The character Sarah Palin had thought was mocking her son was played by a real actress with the very same condition Trig had. Once Palin started calling Family Guy's makers cruel and cold, Friedman decided she had to say something. She wrote an email of her own, which she sent to the New York Times and to other news outlets.
outlets. The New York Times, for whatever reason, only printed a short version. Other outlets printed the whole thing. And in the whole version, Friedman made her own point, to everyone, in her own words. She said her name. She said she was born with Down syndrome. She said she had played Ellen. She said that she herself did not think the joke was cruel. She said she thought the line about the former governor of Alaska was funny. She used the word sarcasm. She explained that in her family, laughing was a normal, healthy part of life because her parents had raised her to live a normal life and to have a normal sense of humor. Then she turned the whole thing around. In the line that made the biggest news of all, she said that her own mother did not carry her around under her arm like a loaf of French bread, the way Sarah Palin carried her son Trig around, looking for votes and sympathy.
That was the line. A loaf of French bread. An actress with Down syndrome accusing the former governor of using her own baby son as a prop in her political career. The story changed shape overnight. The fight was no longer about whether Family Guy was cruel to people with Down syndrome. The fight was now about whether Sarah Palin was using her son as a shield, or as a tool, or as a mascot to score points with the public. A woman who had actually lived with Down syndrome had said publicly that she did not feel hurt by the joke, and that she thought Palin's response was part of the act. Some people on Palin's side thought Friedman was being manipulated by the makers of Family Guy. Other people thought she was speaking for herself. Friedman herself made clear later that nobody told her what to say. She said Palin did not have a sense of humor. She told the press that Palin should laugh a little. A later follow-up came from a popular comedy host, Bill Maher, who publicly backed McFarlane. The Gay and Lesbian Alliance Against Defamation, a civil rights group, did criticize the episode. So did the Parents Television Council, the same conservative watchdog group that has been complaining about Family Guy for decades. Friedman and McFarlane, in the press at least, held their ground together. One thing often gets lost in this story. The episode, viewed calmly, is not really a hit piece on Sarah Palin's son. It is a hit piece on Sarah Palin herself. The joke is not that Ellen has Down syndrome. The joke is that her mother, the fictional one, is the same kind of public figure who uses a child to generate sympathy. That is a joke about politics, not a joke about disability. Friedman understood that. McFarlane claimed to have intended that. And, arguably, the real victim of the joke is not Trig at all. The real target is the way his mother had, in the eyes of the writers, been using him. That does not mean the episode is above criticism. Reasonable people watched it and felt it was still in bad taste, even if the joke was really aimed at the grown-up politician. The visible, on-screen figure is a teenage girl with Down syndrome. Some viewers felt the show did not have the right to put her on screen at all just to score political points. Others felt the writers had made the right choice by letting an actress with the condition tell her own story in her own words. Both of those positions are fair. The show, for better or worse, set that argument in motion and then walked away from it. The real winner of the whole incident, looking back, was Andrea Faye Friedman. For a few days in February of 2010, a working actress with Down syndrome had become the most interesting and quoted voice in a national news story. She had, with nothing more than an email, changed the shape of the public argument. She had stepped out in front of a former presidential running mate and an animation writer and delivered her own message, which was, plainly, that she was not anyone's prop and she would speak for herself. She kept working after that, on other shows, in other roles, until her death in December of 2023. What the episode ended up teaching, if anything, is that Family Guy's jokes do not live inside the show. They leak out. They get picked up by real people. Real politicians take offense. Real actors respond. Real fans choose sides. The writers may think they are just putting one joke into one script. Once the script is aired, it is out in the world, and the world does what the world does. Sometimes the world says the joke is cruel. Sometimes the world says the joke is funny. Sometimes the person the joke is secretly about stands up in her own voice and tells both sides at once that she is not on anybody's side but her own. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. But there is one more dark moment in Family Guy's long run that matters for a reason that does not have to do with a banned script or a mourning fan base or a public fight with a politician. It has to do with the moment a side character, in a single long speech, stood up and told one of the main characters exactly what kind of person he really was. And when the speech was over, most of the audience, quietly, had to agree with every single word of it. Section 10. Quagmire's monologue, the 2-minute rant that rewrote Brian's character. Family Guy has hundreds of characters. Most of them are silly. Most of them exist to deliver one joke and walk away. Some of them come back often enough to become what fans call regulars. And then there are the main four: Peter, Lois, Stewie, and Brian. Those four are the heart of the show. They are the voices you hear hear most. They are the characters most of the cutaways are built around. And of those four, Brian has always held a special spot. He is the sarcastic one, he is the smart one, he is the one who reads books and writes novels and dates women and drinks wine and holds strong opinions about politics. He is, inside the world of Quahog, the voice of reason. For years, he was often the closest thing the show had to its author's own voice. If Peter is the man America thinks it is, Brian is the man Brian thinks he is. That image of Brian, the smart, thoughtful, slightly better than the rest dog, lasted for about a decade. Then, in late 2009, one side character spent 90 uninterrupted seconds tearing it apart. When he was done, Brian was never quite the same character again, and neither was the show. The episode is called Jerome is the New Black. It is the 7th episode of Season 8. It aired on November 22nd, 2009. It was written by John Wiener. It was directed by Brian Iles. The reason the episode even existed was because another major character, Cleveland Brown, had just been given his own spin-off show called The Cleveland Show. Cleveland had been one of Peter's core 4 drinking friends for years. With his character moving to his own series, the writers had to explain, inside the world of Family Guy, why Cleveland was no longer around. So the plot of Jerome is the New Black has Peter, Quagmire, and Joe trying to find a new friend to take the empty 4th chair at the bar. They meet a man named Jerome. Jerome is cool, charming, a great guy. They invite him in. Peter soon discovers that Jerome is one of Lois's old hookups from before her marriage, and this causes problems in the house. That is the main story. It is okay. It is not the reason anyone remembers the episode. The reason people remember the episode is the side plot. Brian, hearing about this whole search for a new friend, offers to fill the spot himself. Peter, to Brian's surprise, tells him that would not work out. Brian asks why not. Peter tells him, plainly, because Quagmire hates him. Brian has lived next door to Quagmire for years. They have been around each other in hundreds of scenes. Brian had no idea. Peter tells him, bluntly, that Quagmire finds him annoying. Brian is confused and hurt. Brian, who thinks of himself as a likable person, decides to find out why. He goes over to Quagmire's house and tries to make friends. He tries to be nice, he compliments him, he brings him food. Quagmire is polite, cold, and keeps his distance. Every attempt Brian makes to win him over gets shrugged off. Finally, Brian, fed up, asks directly. He asks Quagmire why he does not like him. He says he is really trying. He does not understand. He has done nothing wrong as far as he can see. How can Quagmire not like him? Quagmire pauses. Then he answers. The answer that follows is, depending on how you count, somewhere around 90 seconds of uninterrupted speech. No cutaways, no side jokes, no music under it to soften it. Just one character standing still, looking another character in the eyes, and delivering, blow by blow, a full list of every single thing about that character that has ever been wrong. Fans call it the reason you suck speech. It is, without exaggeration, one of the most watched single scenes in the entire run of Family Guy. Quagmire's opening move is to tell Brian, flatly, that he is the worst person Quagmire knows. From there, he does not let up. He reminds Brian that Brian constantly flirts with Lois, even though Lois is the wife of the man who took him in, fed him, and once saved his life. He points out that Brian, instead of being grateful, actually goes to the bathroom on Peter's lawn. He tells Brian that he is a sponge, which is a word for someone who never pays for anything. He calls out Brian's habit of saying he will pay someone back later and then never doing it. He says later never comes. Then he goes deeper. He says what really bothers him about Brian is the way Brian pretends to be a deep, thoughtful man who loves women for their souls, when all Brian actually does is date women who are shallow and nothing more than good-looking. He points out that he, Quagmire, does the same thing. But at least, Quagmire says, he is honest about it. Brian buys these women a copy of a famous novel called The Catcher in the Rye, and then lectures them with a middle school level reading of one of its characters, trying to seem smart. Quagmire does not pretend. Brian does. Quagmire calls that out. Then he goes deeper still. He goes after Brian's politics. He mimics Brian's voice. He mocks the way Brian says things like, we should legalize drugs. Big business is crushing the poor. Homelessness is the greatest problem in America. He then asks a question that knocks the wind out of the argument. He asks what Brian has actually done to help any of those causes. Quagmire says he works down at the soup kitchen. He says he has never once seen Brian there. He says if Brian really wanted to help people, he could grab a ladle and show up. He says driving a hybrid car does not make you a saint. Then he goes after Brian's religion. He reminds Brian that Brian does not believe in God. He asks then who Brian thinks he is, refuses to look down on anybody. Brian has no answer. Then he goes for the personal stuff. He brings up the fact that Brian failed college twice. He brings up the fact that Brian has a son, a real son, a puppy from an earlier relationship shown in a much older episode. Quagmire points out that Brian almost never sees this child.
He asks how Brian can lecture anyone about morality when Brian himself is a failed father. And then Quagmire lands the closing blow. He says all of those things would be bad enough. He says he could even forgive all of them, except for one thing. The thing he cannot forgive is that Brian, on top of everything else, is just a big, sad, alcoholic bore. That is the last word Quagmire uses. Bore. A person who is no fun to be around. A person whose life is sad and whose drinking makes him tedious. He says goodbye to Brian. He thanks him, sarcastically, for the steak Brian had brought over as a peace offering, and he leaves Brian standing there, alone, holding nothing but a list of everything he has ever done wrong. Now, the thing about this speech is that none of it is made up. Every single thing Quagmire says is a real thing Family Guy had already shown over the years. Brian really does flirt with Lois. Go back and watch. He has done it since the earliest episodes.
Peter really did save Brian from dying in an older episode. Brian really did leave a mess on the lawn in an old cutaway. Brian really did try to seduce women by pretending to love literature. Brian really had failed college twice. Brian really did have a son, a young dog, whom he had mostly abandoned. Brian really did drink too much. All of these things were already in the show. Quagmire was not making anything up. He was, in effect, reading back to Brian a list of everything the show had already told you about him. He was, for the first time, making the audience see the pattern. The speech landed like a cannonball. Fans who had been quietly tired of Brian were suddenly handed, on a plate, every argument they had ever had inside their own heads. Critics at the AV Club pointed out, at the time, the strange fact that the show, in this scene, was spending all its time tearing down the one character who most people considered a mouthpiece for the creator. If Brian really represented Seth MacFarlane's own voice, then the speech was, in a way, the show criticizing itself. MacFarlane had written, produced, and voice acted both Brian and Quagmire. He was, literally, yelling at himself in his own words. The reviewer at IGN called the speech completely unexpected. He liked it. He admitted the overall episode was not great, but he felt the rant alone was memorable. Fan reaction was split. For a lot of viewers, it was pure satisfaction. They had been frustrated with Brian for years. Brian had, by the late 2000s, become a character who loved to lecture everyone else while doing nothing to live up to his own standards. He had become the kind of guy real people meet at parties and avoid. Having Quagmire, a man with his own long list of problems, call him out felt like a moment of truth. Online, the speech spread. Clips of it got posted. People shared their favorite lines. It became, for a while, one of the signature scenes fans pointed to when they defended Family Guy as a show that could still surprise. For other viewers, the speech was also uncomfortable. Many noticed that Quagmire himself, inside the show, had done most of the same things he was accusing Brian of, and worse. He was a womanizer. He was in several episodes shown doing terrifying things to women. Things the show often treated as jokes, but that would be serious crimes in the real world. He was disloyal. He was rude. For Quagmire to stand there and lecture anyone about not respecting women felt, to some fans, like a hypocrite claiming the moral high ground. One viewer on the internet wrote, angrily, that Quagmire's own best friend, Peter Griffin, had once murdered Quagmire's pet cat, and Quagmire had forgiven him for that. How, the fan asked, could Quagmire then be offended by Brian leaving a mess on a lawn? That tension is part of why the scene is so often talked about. It is not a clean moral moment. It is a mean character telling an arrogant character the truth about himself while not actually being better himself. Both sides of the conversation are flawed. That is probably what makes it feel so honest. This is not a superhero lecturing a villain. This is two cartoon neighbors in a living room, and both of them are partly right and partly wrong, and neither of them gets to walk away feeling good about it. What the speech did to the show itself is the bigger thing. After Jerome is the New Black, Brian was never quite the same. The writers had, in effect, given themselves permission to make fun of Brian going forward. Later episodes started poking at him more openly. They made him pretentious on purpose. They made his books flop on purpose. They made his relationships go badly on purpose. The hero dog became a target. Some fans loved this, others did not. Either way, you can draw a line. Before the speech, Brian was the sarcastic heart of the show. After the speech, Brian was a character the audience and the writers agreed to stop fully trusting. And that may be the quiet punchline behind all 10 of these dark moments. Family Guy, across its run, kept turning its own sharpness inward. It broke its own rules. It killed its own fan favorites. It mocked its own creator. It put its best-loved characters in dark rooms and made them talk about suicide. It let teenage girls say out loud that they were being abused. It aired in its Christmas special A Factory of Dying Elves. It mocked real politicians on national TV. It brought its own banned episode back again and again just to prove it existed. It is a show that has survived for over 2 decades, not only because it tells jokes, but because, now and then, it dares to tell the truth about itself. The Quagmire rant is the purest version of that. It is the show through one character looking at another character, both voiced by the same man, and saying out loud the things nobody had been brave enough to say. After that moment, you could not really pretend Brian was just a cool dog anymore. You had heard the list. You knew what he was. The audience knew. The writers knew. And the show kept going, week after week, with that knowledge sitting quietly underneath every scene. That is the real dark secret of Family Guy. The show, for all its cutaways and chicken fights and musical numbers and silly voices, has always been willing, once in a while, to turn around and look its own reflection in the mirror. When it does, even for 90 seconds, the rest of the cartoon disappears. What is left is something closer to drama than comedy, closer to truth than to jokes. A cartoon full of sad people pretending, most weeks, not to know how sad they are.
A few dark moments each season where one of them slips and the rest of them and the rest of us finally hear what has been there all along. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.